What is up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News and presented by Sticks.com. I am your host, Emma Lingan. I am joined today by my two wonderful guests, Kierszenblat and Wyatt Thomas, and we are here to talk about all things Pacific Division, plus maybe a little bit of Central, a little bit of Atlantic, because we've got some trades that we need to talk about. But before we get into any of that, do want to remind you that we are brought to you by our good friends at Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get pro-level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's Stix.com. Head over there now and gear up. All right. Guys, before we get into our Pacific Division chat, we have a trade to announce. We have JJ Peterka, a late night trade on Wednesday, headed to the Utah Mammoth. And in return, the Sabres are getting Michael Kesselring and Josh Doan. Adam, I'm going to go to you first. Peterka is a name that's been out there quite a bit in the trade rumors. I think a lot of people maybe were curious or maybe not sure that it would actually come to fruition. Are you surprised by the trade, and are you surprised that it happened this quickly?
Well, I'm not surprised that the trade happened because this is something that people have been talking about for weeks. I know that there was a little bit of a shock value when it came to the return, but I think that considering the situation that Buffalo was in, they did pretty well. Doan is a good young prospect. We know about his father's history in the NHL, and he has some of the same intangibles, off the ice and on the ice that his dad does. So if he can develop into, one of those middle six players, that's going to be huge for Buffalo. And Kesselring, this is a big mobile defenseman who has a very good cap hit. He's going to help out on the blue line, which is expected to change up a little bit. Buffalo, Bowen Byram is another name that we'll see if he gets moved in the next couple of days or weeks. But Buffalo is going to look a lot different. And as for Utah, they're getting a young, really talented forward. Now it's going to be interesting to see how he does next year because he did have a very high shooting percentage. Peterka did, and that kind of contributed to his strong season. But he is a talented young player that can help really connect that Utah team and become stronger offensively. So overall, it was a pretty fair trade. I know that we're going to hear like what other packages were available or what other packages Buffalo received. But in the end, I think that getting essentially a prospect forward who with a high upside and a 24-year-old defenseman who can play top pair minutes or second pair minutes, I think overall, considering the situation Buffalo was in, they did pretty good on the return.
Wyatt, what do you think this does for Utah? I mean, this is a team that's in a really tough division, the Central. Not an easy path to the top there. How much do you think this trade really sort of kind of maybe moves the needle for them in the Central Division?
I think it's going to be a super helpful trade for Utah. They're in a different situation than a lot of teams, being that they're a new team and that they're not going to have any time players at the top of their lineup. So they kind of need to, at the moment, secure as many decent players as they can, especially when they're young, like Peterka is. So I think it's a very good trade to get a guy and extend him so they have him for the foreseeable future now. Lock him down to that team, and now they can use that piece and keep moving forward and keep trying to bring in bigger and bigger pieces as they become hopefully a better and better team.
Yeah, I've got my eye on Utah this year. I feel like this is going to be a good year for them. I think they're going to make some noise in the Central. But for now, we are going to pivot back to the Pacific Division. Going to start with the Canucks. So Evander Kane traded to the Canucks. They now have just over $7 million in cap space after this trade. Kane is costing a little over $5 million. They still have to replace Brock Boeser down the middle. Otherwise, not a whole lot left to do in Vancouver. Adam, when you look at their situation, especially down the middle and their cap situation, do you think the Canucks are going to go about this by re-signing Pius Suter, or do you think that they'll maybe try and strike a trade? I mean, all of their goalies, I think, have shown up in trade conversations. So would they try to trade some assets, or maybe even go off the board and sign someone in free agency?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult to re-sign Pius Suter because this is a player who will most likely get around $5 million on the open market. The Canucks don't want to go over 4 as of right now, so we'll see exactly how that works out. But I mean, the name that we've been hearing for months now, even going back to the trade deadline, which there was a failed trade between Ottawa and Vancouver, but now it would be the Buffalo Sabres, and that's Josh Norris. We know about Josh Norris's history with Quinn Hughes. They're essentially best friends. They were roommates in university. They both spent time in Michigan during the off season. And right now, the running conversation in Vancouver is that it's Operation Keep Quinn Hughes in Vancouver because his contract is up in the next couple of years. So what can you do to keep Quinn Hughes in Vancouver? Maybe bringing in his one of his best friends helps. So I mean, there's risks to Josh Norris, obviously, because of the injury history. And there's a lot of talk about that 15th overall pick. The Canucks have not been shy about trading their first round picks. But if you're looking at potentially what we might see, I don't know if they're going to be able to re-sign Suter. They're going to circle back on Brock Boeser if he doesn't get the deal that he wants. But I think it's going to be low risk, high reward moves during the offseason. Some of those $1 to $2 million deals. If they need to play Philip Hedl down the middle as the 2C, they probably that might be the option. And then you have Teddy Bluger at 3C. But I really do think that they're going to go hot and heavy after Norris in the next couple of days.
All right. Should be a fun time, exciting time leading up to the draft here. Wyatt, when you look at Evander Kane and how he fits into this roster, I mean, obviously he's got a history of injury as well, as recently as this past season, missed the entire season and then came back in for the playoffs. I think if you look at the rest of Vancouver's roster, I mean, he could probably slot right into a top 6 position there. But what do you think about this trade for Vancouver? And obviously low risk financially because it's only 1 year, but how much do you see Evander Kane maybe moving the needle for them?
I'm a little confused what they're trying to do with the Evander Kane trade because I think he's a player. You saw it with the Oilers this year. He can make an impact in big time games, but with how many pieces the Canucks are getting rid of or potentially trying to clear cap space, it doesn't make the most sense to me. I think you're right in that he will probably slot in probably as that second line left winger beside Philip Cheadle and Connor Garland, and that could be a decent line. But with all the other stuff that Kane brings, both the discipline issues, we'll say, after what we saw in the Stanley Cup finals, that can sometimes hurt your team, even though that does come with the physicality and the power forward mentality that he brings that will help you. So I think he could bring them some good pieces in offensively, but I just think the risk and the fact that he's 33 years old doesn't make the most sense for a team that seems to not totally be aware of, are they still trying to be a contender that we saw 2 years ago when they made a decent playoff run, or are they trying to build something new for the future?
Well, and we know Vancouver just, got past the whole JT Miller, Elias Pettersson situation. So now we'll see if Evander Kane brings any more drama to the Vancouver locker room. It does kind of seem to follow him. In that trade, in trading Kane to the Canucks, the Edmonton Oilers cleared up some cap space, which they're going to need because they are trying to re-sign Evan Bouchard. He's an RFA defenseman looking to get a pretty big payday here. Pierre LeBrun reported this week that there is, quote, genuine mutual interest to get a deal done because the two sides want to avoid any drama, heading into the meat of the offseason here. So LeBrun also said that it looks like maybe a 4-year deal, something like what Austin Matthews signed with Toronto. Might be the most likely play. Worth noting that Matthews and Bouchard have the same agent. So could, that a deal like that could give Bouchard a big raise. He was making just under $4 million AAV on his last deal. And he's only 25, so it would make him an unrestricted free agent at 29. And then at the same time, it kind of avoids a major cap crunch for Edmonton while they look to re-sign Connor McDavid. So, Adam, when you look at Bouchard and these kind of negotiations, are you in agreement with this? Do you think that a 4-year deal might be the most likely play? And if so, what do you think it's going to cost the Oilers?
Well, I think even not just with Bouchard, but a lot of players, we're going to see 3 to 4 year deals just because there's new TV contracts coming in. There's a new CBA coming in, and we've already seen how the cap is going to grow. So I do think that, not just Bouchard, but other players are going to have these shorter term deals so that they can cash in once the new TV contracts come in. But I mean, with Bouchard, 4 years, 10 million per is probably around what they're looking like. It's going to be interesting what Edmonton does with their cap, because you essentially have Leon Draisaitl making close to double what he's going to be next year. He's at 14 million. And then you have the big Connor McDavid question. Like, you can't pay McDavid under $14 million now. Like, are we looking at an 18 million to $20 million contract for Connor McDavid? So it's going to be really interesting to see. These last 2 years really were the Oilers' prime contender years because of how the cap was set up. Yes, there's going to be an influx of cash in next year, but adding over these two players are going to have their cap raised by combined $10 million or so. So that is definitely going to put a strain on the Oilers' cap. And we'll see exactly how that kind of trickles down to the bottom players, and if they have to, sign players to league minimums or 1 million just to stay under the cap.
Yeah, Wyatt, what do you think of obviously we have talked before about defense being an issue for the Oilers. Of course, it's going to be a priority for them to get Bouchard re-signed, even though he is more of an offensive defenseman, we'll say. But, looking at their situation now and everything that Adam was just talking about with trying to re-sign McDavid, and now you have the big Draisaitl contract. I mean, is there any concern, do you think, that the Oilers might find themselves in somewhat of a Toronto situation, maybe, where they're, sinking all of their cap space or most of their cap space in, a handful of guys?
That's exactly what I was going to compare it to, actually. I think that in order to pay Bouchard, Draisaitl, and McDavid, it's what you said. They're going to likely have to, the bottom of their roster would have to be players who do not cost a lot of money. So you'd be looking at a lot of rookie deals, a lot of veteran minimum situations. So I think that the 4-year deal makes sense, because assuming they re-sign McDavid, that would give Bouchard the opportunity to cash in another big ticket in the prime of his career, and also give the Oilers the option in 4 years, or if they would want to keep him at that point, or potentially move on to another defensive strategy, more other players. And also, if they cannot bring in McDavid, you would assume that would change Evan Bouchard's mindset in terms of staying in Edmonton. So that would give him the option to move elsewhere, maybe to another contender, if by that time he's no longer happy staying in Edmonton. But totally, I think this is too much money in too few players, and it's going to be tough for the Oilers to stay in this competitive window if they're going to burn this much of their cap space in pretty much one line and their top defensive pairing.
Yeah, and you think about it too, in another year, you've got Matthias Ekholm coming off the books too. So going to have to figure out what to do there, how to either re-sign him or just kind of beef up the blue line. So a lot of, I think, more questions than answers for the Oilers right now. But for now, let's head over to Calgary. Rasmus Andersson looks like talks did not go well between his camp and the Flames when it comes to, signing an extension. It's feeling like a trade here could be imminent, maybe more so than we thought before. Trade talks it's been around, but they're starting to intensify. Andersson has 1 year remaining on his contract. Is at 4.55 million AAV. He's got a limited no trade clause. He's drawn interest from a lot of teams. including but not limited to Columbus, Carolina, Ottawa, Boston, Montreal, Toronto. Again, they've been in the mix previously. They could be back in the mix for him now. The Flames are not necessarily in a rush to move him immediately. As I mentioned, he's got a 6-team no trade list that doesn't change on July 1st. But, with the draft coming up as quickly as it is, do you think that, Adam, I'll ask you first, do you think that Calgary should be showing a sense of urgency with trading him? Because, right shot defensemen are, they come at a premium in this league, so they might be able to take advantage of the market there. What do you think? Do you think that Calgary should be trying to trade him before the draft, or should they be a little more patient with this one?
I think if you're Calgary, you bring in Andersson into the regular season and you see kind of how they go up until the trade deadline, because we know that the draft for 2026 is deeper than the 2025 draft. So if you can get, a first round pick in 2026 compared to 2025, it is considered to be a higher overall pick. And if Andersson, it also allows Calgary to kind of decide what type of team they are next year, because they made a lot of strides this year. They almost made the playoffs. They have a star in the making in goaltender Dustin Wolf. They have built a strong foundation of a team. And if they come out really hot and start the year strong, maybe that changes how the Rasmus Andersson negotiations work, because we know he wants to stay in Calgary. He's made that very clear over the last year. He's also made it clear that, he sees a future with this team. So I don't think that when you're in this situation, yes, there is a little bit of rush that needs to be involved, but you don't have to go out, the next day and trade him. You have until next trade deadline, kind of see how the season plays out. And yeah, the Pacific Division is going to be really interesting how it shakes out, because there's a lot of uncertainty on, how some of these teams are going to be formed. So why wait, or why, have a trade right now and potentially lose out on future value when you can help build up Andersson's trade value at least to the trade deadline, and then move him to a team that might be dealing with injuries and is desperate to add a number one or number two right shot defenseman.
What do you think? Do you think Andersson starts the season with the Flames, or do you think he gets traded before then?
I think it's in the Flames' best interest to keep him around until the season. I don't really see a downside to them doing that. He has the value he has right now, and I would assume they believe he's still going to be a quality defenseman for them. So if he plays the same way we're used to it next season, that's going to either A, help a team that, as you said, is close to the playoffs, is going to be trying to get into the playoffs this year. Then you have a quality player who can help you win. Or if the Flames are not a team that's looking towards the playoffs and maybe take a step back, you hope he boosts his value, and you can still deal him at any point until the trade deadline. So there should be no rush for the Flames to deal Andersson at this current moment. You still have him under contract for a year. You're not going to lose him for anything until next offseason. So I think they definitely should keep him around in Calgary and hope that he either helps them win or continues to boost his trade value.
All right. Well, let's head over to LA for a minute, because Tanner Jeannot is a name that's been floating around. It seems like he is going to be headed out of LA to the open market. He is reportedly seeking a bigger role than the one that he had in LA. He came in from Tampa sort of as a top 9 option, I think, but he spent most of the last season on the fourth line, led the Kings in hits, had 211 hits, but he's only averaging about 11 minutes of ice time per game, doesn't provide a ton in the offensive zone. So if he is seeking that bigger role and he wants to do that on the open market, Adam, looking at the Kings forward group as it stands right now, how do you see them? Jeannot's physicality is obviously very valuable, but you want someone who can provide a little bit more in the offensive zone. So how do you see LA addressing their fourth line this offseason? Is it going to be internally? Are they going to be making trades? How do you see this kind of shaking out?
Well, if you're LA and Jeannot does walk, there are players in their system that, can play that fourth line role. And, I'm going to be interested to see with teams having a little bit more cap space or a little bit more cap room, if maybe we start to see rotations on the fourth line. So, instead of having a designated fourth line, maybe you have 6 players on your fourth line, and then you kind of plug and play, depending on who's going, who's not. So that, like, if we're talking about a top 6 forward, that's a little bit different. But I know that Jeannot wants a bigger role, but I think, a fourth line role is kind of where he thrives. Like, he's not going to be a shutdown forward. He's not going to score 50, 60 points in a season. He's going to throw hits. He's going to be defensively responsible, going to, be an agitator. That's what he is as a player. I know that, Tampa Bay a couple years ago gave up a lot to get him because they hoped that he could be in that top 6 role, but sometimes you can't fit a square peg into a round hole, right? Like, he's playing the role that he's developed into. So I'm sure LA can find some cheaper veterans, cheaper younger players that can fill those roles. But if I think that if they have 5 or 6 players that can play in that fourth line role, I think that's easy to find at the NHL level.
Yeah, I know the Nashville Predators are still thanking the Tampa Bay Lightning for that trade. Even as soon as this upcoming draft, they've still got one of Tampa's picks. So it's still the gift that keeps on giving for Nashville. Wyatt, do you think Tanner Jeannot, do you kind of agree with Adam there that maybe he's maybe biting off more than he can chew or asking for too much and looking for a larger role on the open market? Or do you think that it just wasn't a fit in LA?
I think he might be asking for a little too much in terms of the team, but that doesn't mean I don't necessarily think he can get it because he's still on a team that has been fairly successful recently in the Kings. They've been good in the regular season. They just have happened to run to the Edmonton Oilers in the playoffs, which is a bit of a tough draw. But I think he's right in that the Kings can definitely find someone who brings a similar kind of physicality, but can also do more in other areas offensively, provide more, whether that comes through the Kings farm system or they go out looking in the open market or in the draft. Like the production that Jeannot was giving them is not production that's so good. It's difficult to find. You can find plenty of players who are going to give you similar type of numbers and similar type of production that Tanner Jeannot was giving them, who might cost less, and also might be younger and more unknown at the moment. So I think that this isn't a move that's going to really hurt the Kings. And I also think Jeannot, teams are always looking for a guy who can lay as many hits as he can. There's almost always a couple different roles around the league for a guy like that. So I think this is a move that benefits both sides right now.
All right. Well, let's head to Seattle because the Kraken have been busy this week. First big move of the week. They traded for Mason Marchment from the Dallas Stars. So traded a 3rd round pick in 2026 and a 4th round pick in 2025. And then, of course, just on Thursday, traded for Freddie Gaudreau from the Wild as well. So they've been busy making moves. Marchment in particular, I think, is the big one here. He had a big role in Dallas, 30 years old, 47 points in 62 games. He was out for a bit due to injury, but he's got 1 year left on his 4-year, $18 million contract, so $4.5 million AAV. Adam, do you think that Marchment and Gaudreau, but specifically Marchment, do you think that this is a piece that can help the Kraken long term, beyond this year? And do you think it'll help them be competitive? And what else do they need to add?
Well, I think when you look at the Seattle Kraken, they do need that physicality that Marchment can bring. And they're also a very young team. So having players that have experience going deep into the playoffs should help. You look at Matty Beniers, Shane Wright, Berkeley Canton, they're going to draft again high this year. They're assembling kind of a young strong prospect pool that's going to need those older players who, you know, can kind of teach them the ropes at the NHL level. So I think that Marchment, you know, he's a safe bet as a middle six forward. There were a lot of teams in on him going into what ended up being the Seattle Kraken trade. So I think it's a safe bet. And same with Gaudreau. You know, Gaudreau is just a player that loves to throw hits, loves to play that physical brand of hockey. Minnesota kind of clears up some cap space. Seattle gets a bottom six forward that, you know, potentially could replace some of the stuff that Yanni Gourde provided them. So, you know, these two moves are really, we know that these two moves are set up in a way that they know that the Pacific Division is going to be very tough this year. So they need to add that toughness to try and get back into the postseason. And yeah, overall, they're two safe bets. So it just depends on, you know, how Lane Lambert plays these players and what type of position. But overall, yeah, smart bets by the Seattle Kraken.
Wyatt, what do you think this does for the Kraken in the division? Do you think it moves the needle enough for them to, you know, kind of actually make some noise, maybe get back into the playoffs this year, or do they need to be doing some more?
I think they can get around the playoffs. I don't know if Mason Marchment's a move that's going to make your team from missing the playoffs to making the playoffs, but it's definitely not going to hurt them to bring in a quality player like that and a bit of a veteran presence. It's a team that is kind of working around a lot of younger players and hoping to get production from them. And having a veteran who can been around the NHL, seen more things than a lot of players in that team have, it's definitely going to help them. I still think they're kind of in a similar situation to what we talked about with Utah earlier, in that they're a newer team and they have a bunch of quality players, but it does kind of feel like they need to make some kind of big splash in order to take the next step. I just don't think that right now is the time to do that. I think a lot of teams are in a situation where they're kind of preparing for next offseason when they can kind of go big game hunting and see if they can take a bigger step forward and move their team into the next level of contention, whatever they think that is. And I think Seattle is a member of that group, a team that could be quality this year, might be able to sneak into the playoffs, make a little bit of noise. Who knows? But I think next season, if they can make some kind of big move, bring in a big name, that could take the Kraken from that fringe playoff team to more of a legitimate contender.
Yeah, you mentioned big game hunting. Not a lot of that, I don't think, beyond, you know, the Mitch Marners of the world. Not sure we're going to be seeing a ton of that this year, more so next year, like you said. But speaking of the small game hunting that's happening right now, the Vegas Golden Knights have re-signed Reilly Smith, 1 year, $2 million. Obviously, Smith had won cup with the Golden Knights in 2023, then left, went to Pittsburgh. He came back before the playoff run last year. Adam, obviously, he's, you know, maybe not the player that he once was, but how do you think that, you know, with Smith coming back, does this say anything about the, you know, the Golden Knights and their plans and how they are trying to sort of maybe get back to the playoffs next year?
Well, I think when it comes to Reilly Smith, it's more of familiarity. Like, this is a player who works in Vegas' system. He didn't work in Pittsburgh. He didn't work with the Rangers. Like, there are just some players that work in certain systems and don't in others. But I think Vegas, this is a good signing for Vegas because, yeah, they're going to be after Mitch Marner, but they don't have the cap space at the moment. They want to bring in a big player, but they just might not have the assets to do it. So if you can kind of build up, Vegas is at the point where, you know, they want those ceiling type players, the players that will raise the ceiling. But if they can't get that, at least they can get the players like Reilly Smith who will keep them at a high floor. So it's kind of a move that they know what they're getting. They know Smith knows the organization. The organization knows Smith. They've had, you know, history together. They know that he has chemistry with players on the team. So it's just one of those kind of, it's one of those, we're going to sign him as kind of a security blanket in case things don't go the way that we want them to in the offseason, because yeah, like right now they won't be able to afford Mitch Marner unless he takes like a massive discount. We know about all the rumors that are going on in Vegas. There's the Alex Pietrangelo situation. So, you know, maybe some of this LTIR stuff starts to come into play with Vegas and they do sign Marner. But I think, you need guys like Reilly Smith in your bottom six or even middle six. And that's how you kind of build those cup contending teams.
Wyatt, what do you see Vegas doing this year? I mean, just how their season ended in the playoffs last year, maybe I think earlier than a lot of people would have expected. How do you see them kind of rebounding from that and building on what was a very successful regular season last year?
I think this move helps them do that. I think this year they were able to get to the second round, and same stories with the Kings, just ran into the Oilers. But with all the situations the Oilers are in, you have to expect they might regress a little bit. So I think bringing in a guy that works in your system and knows how to work with the other players around him, it makes more sense than if they'd let him go and brought in someone new for around the same price who would have to kind of learn everything and get up to speed. When you bring Smith back in, he's caught up. He knows what to do like the back of his hand in Vegas. So I think it makes sense. And they're a team that, if they can get back to the playoffs and have a similar regular season than what they did this year, it may be a more reasonable route to make a deeper playoff run like we saw a couple years ago when they went all the way. So I think bringing in Smith, especially at this price where it doesn't really hurt them that much, is a good move for the Golden Knights looking forward if they still want to try and be the cup contenders that we've seen them be in the recent years.
All right. Well, lots of exciting things going on in the Pacific Division, and especially with the draft coming up, definitely a lot of storylines to keep an eye on here. So just a reminder that the Wraparound will be here to keep you caught up on all of those storylines in the Pacific and beyond. I will be back tomorrow with Adam again, and we're going to be talking about some other NHL and non-NHL hockey news. So definitely make sure to tune in for that. Thank you again to Sticks.com for sponsoring us. And thank you to my wonderful guests for joining me. For Wyatt Thomas and Adam Kierszenblat, I'm Emma Lingan. This is The Wraparound, and we'll see you tomorrow.